A whiteout blizzard drove a homeless grandmother and her German shepherd toward the mountain. One more mile and they wouldn't make it. Every house below was lit, every door locked. The dog dragged her to a lone cabin where a retired Navy SEAL hid from the world. He opened up, brought them inside, and the trouble arrived with them. A foreclosure notice, a moving light in the trees, then a clean power cut that felt intentional. The SEAL didn't come back to fight anyone. But when the dog found a hidden tracker behind the cabin, he knew the storm wasn't the deadliest thing out there. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. Below the mountain, the town glowed like it was safe. Up here, wind scraped the pines and snow erased the road. One small cabin held a single square of warmth against a brutal, silent sky. Caleb Rourke had chosen this place because it stayed out of everyone's way. No traffic, no neighbors dropping by with questions they didn't have the right to ask. Just the mountain, the stove, the routine. He moved through the cabin like a man keeping a promise to himself. Wood stacked tight, kettle filled, lanterns checked. On the mantel sat a faded photograph and beside it a thin chain of dog tags. He didn't wear them anymore. He kept them where he could see them, like a boundary line. The metal gave a soft clink when he wiped dust from the frame. The sound snapped through him so fast his hand froze midair. It wasn't fear, more like a reflex that remembered old doors, old nights, old costs. Caleb breathed once, slow and controlled, and set the cloth down. The fire popped. The cabin settled. Silence returned, the kind he'd trained himself to call peace, even when it felt like a room he could never fully heat. Outside, the storm had teeth. Snow hit the window in sideways bursts, then eased, then came again. It wasn't the gentle kind of winter that decorated trees. This was the kind that erased mistakes, erased footprints, erased people. Caleb stared into the stove as if it might show him a reason to care. It didn't. That was the deal he'd made with the mountain. No surprises, no attachments, no new grief. Then the knock came, small, careful, as if the hand making it didn't believe it deserved an answer. Caleb's shoulders tightened before his mind caught up. He crossed the cabin without wasted motion, not rushing, not hesitating. He rested his palm on the doorknob and listened. Wind. Snow. And beneath it, breathing. Two patterns, one shallow and uneven, one low and steady. A faint scratch against wood followed like nails shifting for balance. He opened the door and the storm lunged inside. On his porch stood a woman wrapped in a wool coat that had seen better decades. Her face was lined, but her eyes held something stubborn, pride that refused to crumble even when her lips trembled from cold. Snow clung to her lashes. A canvas crossbody bag hung at her hip, light enough to say she hadn't carried much into the blizzard. She stayed upright by will alone. Beside her stood a German shepherd, big-chested and thick-coated, snow dusting his muzzle. His ears were up. His gaze was steady, not panicked. One front paw touched down cautiously, a remembered injury made louder by the cold. He stood slightly in front of the woman, angled into the wind so it hit him first. Not threatening, protecting. The woman lifted her chin. "I'm not asking for charity," she said, voice thin but firm. "Just one night of heat." Caleb didn't answer right away. He felt the old impulse to close the door on everything that might ask something of him. But the shepherd's eyes pinned him like a quiet question. The dog wasn't begging. He was measuring. Caleb had lived a life built on reading posture, on recognizing when someone was out of options. He stepped back. "Come in." The woman hesitated just long enough to confirm he meant it, then moved inside with careful steps. The dog followed, scanning the darkness behind them once before crossing the threshold. Warm air wrapped around them like a blanket. The woman's shoulders sagged a fraction, the first sign that her body had been holding itself together on sheer refusal. Caleb pulled a chair close to the stove and set a folded blanket over her shoulders without touching her skin. He set water on to boil, then began turning what he had into soup, broth, dried vegetables, whatever could become warmth in a bowl. His movements were efficient, practiced, almost clinical, but not unkind. The German shepherd positioned himself near the door and lowered to the floor, back toward the storm, eyes tracking everything. He didn't relax. His ears stayed tuned. He watched Caleb's hands, watched the woman's breathing, watched the corners of the cabin as if memorizing exits. "What's his name?" Caleb asked because he needed something simple. The woman glanced at the dog the way people glance at lifelines. "Rourke," she said. "And I'm Ruth." Rourke's eyes flicked to Ruth at the sound of her voice, then back to Caleb. Caleb didn't like how that look made him feel, like he was being asked to be the kind of man he'd stopped practicing. When the soup was ready, Ruth took the bowl with both hands as if it mattered more than food. She ate slowly. Color crept back into her face. The cabin's quiet shifted. It wasn't empty anymore. It had a heartbeat in it. Rourke rose once, limped 2 steps, and pressed his shoulder lightly into Ruth's shin. Not pleading, grounding. Ruth's hand dropped onto his head, fingers trembling in thick fur. Caleb saw that gesture, and something old twisted in his chest, memory shaped like hands near a stove, waiting for him, trusting he'd show up. A gust hammered the window. Rourke's head snapped toward the glass, ears forward, body suddenly rigid. Caleb followed the dog's stare and saw it. A faint moving glow down the slope, half hidden by trees, appearing and vanishing like someone trying not to be seen. Then it was gone. Rourke made a low sound that wasn't a growl exactly. It was a warning offered to someone who understood warnings. Caleb looked at Ruth. Her face had gone still, not from cold now, but from dread. Caleb slept in a chair with his back to the wall, and the storm never truly stopped talking. When morning came sharp and blue, the moving light from the night before sat in his mind like a splinter. He checked the lock, slid the bolt, and watched the tree line until his coffee went cold. Ruth's cough returned with daylight, dry, stubborn, the kind that stole air in small bites. Caleb didn't debate it. He offered a ride into town for medicine the way he offered firewood, not as pity, but as necessity. Ruth tried to refuse out of habit. Caleb didn't argue. He simply grabbed his keys and herded warmth into motion. Rourke jumped into the truck without being told, settling carefully to protect his bad leg. Caleb noticed how the dog managed pain, quietly, without drama, like it had learned long ago that suffering didn't earn mercy. The road down the mountain was narrow and slick, snow packed hard like a warning. Below, the town looked calm in daylight, as if it had never shut its doors on anyone. At the pharmacy, Caleb moved fast through the aisles. Antibiotics, cough syrup, tea, a heating pad he didn't admit he was buying. He was turning toward the counter when a uniform stepped into his path. Deputy Evan Cross was built solid, face open in a tired way, like a man who spent more time mediating problems than solving them. Recognition flickered across Evan's eyes, not friendly, not hostile, cautious. "Rourke," Evan said quietly, "didn't expect to see you." "Just passing through," Caleb replied. Evan's gaze slid to the items in Caleb's hands, then past the window where Rourke waited in the truck, sitting upright like a sentry. Something shifted in Evan's expression, hesitation dressed up as routine. "Everything all right?" he asked. Caleb weighed the truth. "Helping someone," he said. Evan nodded, then paused like he wanted to say more. Across the street, a bulletin board in the general store window held a cluster of printed notices. One logo caught Caleb's eye because it didn't belong in a town that small: Northstar Lending. Evan saw him looking. His jaw tightened, then he glanced away as if the name had heat. "Those folks," Evan began, then stopped. "If you need anything, call." The offer sounded real. The fear behind it did too. Caleb left with the medicine and a new awareness. In this town, even the law watched its words. He crossed to the general store for supplies. The bell above the door rang bright and false. Halfway down an aisle, a man in a dark work jacket stood with his hands in his pockets, not shopping so much as taking inventory of the room. Neat beard, calm eyes, a smile practiced for daylight. "Morning," the man said, voice warm enough to pass. "You're not from around here." Caleb didn't mirror the smile. "Actually, I am." The man's gaze drifted to the truck outside, to Ruth's profile, small under the passenger side glass. "I'm looking for an elderly woman," he said lightly, as if discussing weather. "Family's worried, cold night, accidents happen." Caleb felt the shape of the threat without needing it spoken. "She's safe," he said. The man's smile thinned and returned, measured. "Good." He stepped closer, just enough to test space. "Name's Silas Cade. I help people with transitions." His eyes flicked over Caleb's posture, the steadiness in his hands, the lack of flinch. "Wouldn't want misunderstandings." Caleb held his ground. "Then don't create one." For a heartbeat, Silas's friendliness slipped, revealing something harder underneath. Calculation, not anger. Then the mask returned. "Enjoy your stay," he said, and it sounded like a forecast. Back in the truck, Ruth didn't ask what happened. She saw it on Caleb's face anyway. "You met one of them," she said softly. Caleb kept his eyes on the road. "Who's them?" Ruth stared out at the town like it could hear her. "Northstar," she said. "Not just a company, a net." Her fingers tightened around the strap of her bag. "The man who signed me up had a voice like kindness. Then the numbers changed. Then papers arrived with signatures I didn't write." "You didn't call the police?" Caleb asked. Ruth gave a short, humorless breath. "The law stands with paper," she said, "not with an old woman who reads slow." Back at the cabin, the mountain greeted them with wind and a sky too clean to trust. Caleb unloaded supplies and checked the perimeter without making a show of it. He didn't want Ruth to feel like a hostage. He didn't want the mountain to feel like a battlefield. But his body remembered how to prepare. Rourke paced once inside, then went straight to the back door and stared at it. He sniffed the bottom seam, then the wall beside it, then the corner near the shed outside as if a trail lived there that human eyes couldn't see. He returned to the same spot again and again, ears tilting, nostrils flaring, attention sharp. Caleb watched, a slow certainty forming. Dogs didn't fixate like that without reason. He grabbed his coat and stepped out behind the cabin. Snow lay smooth in most places, untouched and innocent. But near the fence line, the surface looked wrong, slightly compressed, slightly too even, like something had been placed and brushed over in a hurry. Rourke limped to the spot, paw lifted, then scraped the snow once, controlled, precise. A tiny metallic glint flashed and vanished under the white. The metallic glint behind the cabin wasn't a trick of light. Caleb felt his stomach tighten, then he let the feeling pass and replaced it with focus. He grabbed a shovel, not because he needed one, but because it made his hands steady. Rourke stood beside him, breath puffing white, ears forward, weight balanced, ready but not frantic. Caleb scraped away snow in thin layers, careful not to crush whatever was underneath. The wind tried to bite his knuckles through his gloves. Rourke scraped once more, then stopped, as if to say, "Right there." A small black unit surfaced, palm-sized, wrapped in weatherproof plastic and held in place with a magnet. Cheap, disposable. The kind of thing meant to be found only after it had already done its job. Caleb didn't curse. He didn't exhale in disbelief. He just stared at it long enough for the truth to settle into his bones. They were watching. He slid the device into a cloth and pocketed it. Rourke sniffed the spot again, then turned away like it was already solved. But he didn't go back inside. Instead, he limped toward the tree line with a purpose that made Caleb's skin prickle. "Show me," Caleb murmured. Rourke led him downhill to a shallow dip where a frozen creek ran under a skin of ice. The snow there looked disturbed. Barely, but enough. Rourke stopped beside a half-buried fallen pine and nosed the base, then pawed once, twice, not digging wildly, pointing. Caleb knelt and brushed the snow aside. A nylon pouch appeared, shoved under the drift like someone had hidden it in a hurry and hoped the weather would finish the job. He unzipped it. Inside were photocopies of contracts, pages stamped with Northstar Lending, names and addresses circled in red, numbers corrected with a pen that didn't belong to the original ink. Beneath the paper sat a USB drive, scuffed and dull. Caleb's pulse stayed slow, but his jaw went tight. This wasn't one bad loan. This was a pattern, a system. He didn't plug the USB into anything. That was how people got careless and ended up powerless. Instead, he sealed the pouch and looked at Rourke. The dog's gaze held steady as if he'd delivered the warning and left the choice to the human. Back inside, Ruth sat near the stove, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hands cupped around a mug. When Caleb entered, she watched his face first, then the pouch in his grip. "You found something," she said. Caleb set the pouch on the table, not dramatic, just real. "They're tracking you," he replied. "Or me. Maybe both." Ruth's shoulders sagged for half a second. Then she pulled them back up like she refused to be folded. "I kept telling myself it was just letters," she whispered. "Just paper." Rourke limped to her side and leaned in, pressing his shoulder against her shin. Ruth rested her hand on his head, fingers trembling in the thick fur. Caleb's eyes flicked to the mantel. Photo, dog tags, the thin chain that clinked when the cabin settled. The sound hadn't hurt him this time. It had anchored him. "Tell me what happened," he said. Ruth swallowed. "The roof leaked after a storm," she began. "My furnace started dying. I called because the number on the flyer said, 'Help.'" The voice was gentle. He said it would be temporary. Her mouth twisted with humor that couldn't fully form. Funny how gentle voices can still take your house. She explained the rising interest, the rewritten numbers, the second set of papers that arrived with signatures that didn't look like hers. The day Northstar's men came in clean coats and polite smiles, speaking like neighbors while telling her she had a week to leave. Caleb listened without interrupting. Not because he was kind, because he knew what it meant to be dismissed. He knew what it meant to be crushed by procedure. When Ruth finished, she coughed. Harder this time, a rasp that stole her breath. Caleb's attention sharpened immediately. "I'm fine," she tried to say, but her voice broke on the last word. "You're not," Caleb said, calm but final. "We're going to the clinic." In town, the doctor didn't waste time. "Early pneumonia," she said, frowning as she listened to Ruth's lungs. "Treatable, but she needs warmth, rest, and no stress." Caleb almost laughed at the last part. Stress was already parked outside his cabin with its engine running. By late afternoon, he made one more stop before going back up the mountain. A small storefront near Main Street held a weathered sign and a fogged window, a local radio station that doubled as a newsroom. Caleb knocked once and waited. A woman opened the door with a pen tucked behind her ear and the kind of stare that measured people for truth before it measured them for charm. "Can I help you?" she asked. Caleb held up the pouch. "I think you can," he replied. Inside, the room smelled like old coffee and warm electronics. Posters of past storms and community fundraisers covered the wall. The woman introduced herself as Tessa Vale, and when Caleb slid the pouch onto her desk, her expression shifted from curiosity to something sharper. "Northstar," she said quietly, flipping through the copies. "I knew it." "You've seen this before," Caleb said. Tessa nodded. "I started connecting foreclosures months ago. Same speed, same neighborhoods, same corrections after signatures." Her mouth tightened. "They sent me a letter from a lawyer. Then they sent a man. Not to threaten me loudly, just to remind me what could happen if I kept asking." Caleb tapped the USB with a knuckle. "You can open it safely?" "I can," Tessa replied, already thinking in steps, not feelings. "But once I do, they'll feel it." Caleb's eyes went distant for a heartbeat, then returned. "Good," he said. "Let them." On the drive back up the mountain, the sky lowered and thickened. Snow started again, soft at first, then heavy. When the cabin came into view, Caleb's gut tightened. A dark SUV sat on the lower road where no one parked unless they were waiting. It didn't move. It didn't flash lights. It just existed, like a question that wanted an answer. Rourke went rigid in the passenger seat, ears locked forward. Ruth stared through the windshield and whispered, "That's them." Caleb didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He drove like he refused to be herded. The SUV's engine stayed quiet. No doors opened. No one waved. It simply watched until Caleb's truck disappeared around the bend, and the mountain, for the first time, felt like it had an audience. The SUV was gone by nightfall, but its presence stayed in Caleb's nerves. Ruth's cough worsened with the cold, and Caleb responded the only way he knew how. He tightened the routine, checked the locks, set lanterns within reach, and kept the stove fed like it was a lifeline. Rourke paced the cabin's edges, then stopped at the back door, nose pressed low, listening to a silence humans couldn't hear. A knock came just before dusk, firmer than the first one, confident enough to assume it would be answered. Caleb opened the door without stepping outside. The wind shoved in, carrying snow and pine and the faint scent of exhaust. 3 men stood on the porch, their posture too controlled for neighbors. Silas Cade was in front, hands visible, smile ready. "Evening," Silas said. "We heard there might be some confusion about occupancy." Behind him, the 2 men stayed half a step back, watching Caleb's shoulders, his hands, the cabin window, cataloging risk. Ruth appeared behind Caleb, wrapped in a blanket, standing straight like she refused to look small. Rourke moved forward immediately and placed himself between Ruth and the porch. He didn't bark. He didn't lunge. He simply stood there, a living boundary with amber eyes that didn't blink. Silas's smile thinned a fraction. "Ma'am," he said, voice soft, almost concerned. "You're making things complicated for yourself. Benefits, medical access, safety." He let the words hang like a warning that wanted to sound like advice. Caleb didn't raise his voice. "You should leave," he said. Silas chuckled as if appreciating how reasonable Caleb was trying to be. "Of course. We're not here to cause discomfort." His gaze flicked toward Ruth. "We just don't want accidents in this weather." Rourke's stance didn't change. Caleb noticed one of Silas's men shift his weight, unsettled, not by a weapon, but by a dog that wasn't afraid. Silas stepped back. "Stay warm," he said, and the phrase landed like a threat dressed in manners. When they left, the porch boards creaked under retreating boots. Then a car door shut somewhere in the dark with a hard slam. The sound cracked through Caleb like a memory he hadn't invited. His hand tightened on the doorframe. For a second, he wasn't in a cabin. He was somewhere else, somewhere louder, where doors meant traps and silence meant waiting for the wrong moment. A soft metal clink pulled him back, dog tags shifting on the mantel as the cabin settled. Caleb breathed in, then out. He shut the door, slid the bolt, and turned toward Ruth. "You didn't ask for any of this," Ruth said quietly. Caleb's eyes stayed steady. "Neither did you," he answered, "but it's here." The power cut an hour later, clean and total. No flicker, no slow dim, just instant darkness, as if someone had turned the world off with a switch. Ruth's breath hitched. Caleb moved immediately. Lantern. Match. Flame. He adjusted the stove damper, spoke calmly about storms and outages like words could anchor panic. "It's fine," he said, not lying, just leading. "We've got heat." But Rourke wasn't fine. The dog stood at the back door, whining once, low, urgent, and then he scratched at the floor with one controlled scrape like he was pointing, not panicking. Caleb pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stepped out behind the cabin. The snow had thickened, blowing sideways. The beam cut a narrow tunnel through white. Rourke led him to the shed post near the fence line, the same area as before, but not the same spot. He sniffed, then stopped, nose pressed to the base of the wood. He pawed once and stepped back. Caleb dropped to a knee and dug with gloved hands, moving fast but careful. His fingers hit plastic, then wire. He lifted a larger unit out of the snow, a sealed pack with bundled wiring, tucked tight against the post like someone had rehearsed placing it. This wasn't for tracking. This was for making a problem. Caleb's jaw set. He didn't try to disarm it in the storm. He covered it, marked the spot in his mind, and backed away with Rourke at his heel. He could feel the timing now, the way pressure escalated when polite threats didn't land. Inside, Ruth sat close to the stove, shoulders tight beneath the blanket. Caleb didn't show her the device. He didn't want fear living in her chest where pneumonia already was. Instead, he handed her warm tea and watched her hands stop shaking one breath at a time. His phone buzzed once, then again, battery low because the power was out. A message from an unknown number lit the screen in stark white. "Return what isn't yours, or she won't have a place to stay." Caleb stared until the words blurred. Then he felt Rourke's head press gently into his thigh, heavy and grounding, like the dog was reminding him where the real line was. Caleb powered the phone down. He didn't pace. He didn't curse. He simply fed 2 logs into the stove and watched the flames rise, steady and bright, like they refused to be negotiated with. Ruth looked up at him, eyes wet but proud. "You don't have to carry this," she whispered. Caleb's voice stayed low. "I'm not carrying you," he said. "I'm standing with you." Outside, the wind howled. The windows shook. And behind the cabin, under fresh snow, something wired and waiting sat in the dark like a promise of what came next. The text message didn't fade when Caleb put the phone away. It burned behind his eyes. The cabin felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in to listen. He fed the stove, then started packing a go-bag on the table with the same calm he used when panic wanted to drive. Ruth dozed in the chair, fever sweat dampening her hairline despite the cold air. Rourke stayed close to her feet, rising every time she coughed, then settling again with a patience that looked like devotion. Caleb watched them both and made the decision he'd been trying not to make since the porch knock. Silence wasn't neutral anymore. Silence was permission. He stepped outside and checked behind the cabin again, flashlight sweeping the fence post where he'd uncovered the wired unit. Snow had drifted over the spot, hiding it clean. Whoever planted it had counted on weather and darkness to do the rest. Caleb returned inside, closed the door softly, and kept his voice low. "Ruth," he said. Her eyes opened, tired but stubborn. "You don't need to do anything," she rasped. "I'm not doing this because I need to feel useful," he replied. "I'm doing it because they escalated." Ruth's gaze flicked to Rourke, then back to Caleb. "If you poke them," she whispered, "they don't just push back. They swallow you." Caleb nodded like he'd already measured that cost. "Then we do it clean," he said. "Fast. With witnesses." He called Tessa first. She answered on the second ring, voice tight like she'd been waiting for the moment the story turned dangerous. "They're not just tracking," Caleb told her. "They cut power. There's something wired behind my cabin." A beat of silence. Then, "That's not lending," Tessa said. "That's intimidation with tools." "Can you lock down what you pulled from the USB?" Caleb asked. "I'm copying it to an air-gapped system," she replied. "But copies won't be enough if they paint Ruth as unreliable. We need originals, the kind that holds up when lawyers start smiling." Caleb stared at the mantel. The dog tag chain rested beside the photo, still as a line drawn in steel. "Her house," he said. That's where they'll hide what matters. Tessa exhaled slowly. I can meet you, she offered, but if we walk in there wrong, they'll call it trespass. Or worse. I'll bring someone who has a key, Caleb said. Deputy Evan Cross didn't answer right away when Caleb called. When he did, his voice sounded like someone choosing between two bad doors. You're asking me to step on a landmine, Evan said. I'm asking you to look, Caleb replied. Because whatever this is, it's using your badge as cover. Evan swallowed. Meet me 2 streets over from her place, he said finally. No lights, no hero moves. By midday, snow had started again. Thicker, dirtier flakes that made the town look blurred around the edges. Caleb left Ruth bundled near the stove with a thermometer, antibiotics, and strict instructions. He didn't like leaving her. He liked it even less when he saw Rourke's eyes follow him to the door. You stay, Caleb told the dog quietly. Rourke didn't protest. He just pressed his head once against Ruth's knee, then sat, facing the door, like a sentry ordered to hold the line. Outside, Caleb's truck engine turned over rough, the sound swallowed by wind. He drove down the mountain with his jaw locked and his hands steady. In town, he parked where Evan had said. Tessa was already there, scarf pulled high, eyes bright with a determination that didn't need applause. Evan arrived last, unmarked vehicle, shoulders tense beneath his coat. We go in through the back, he said. We don't touch what we don't need. We document everything. Caleb nodded. Understood. As they walked, Tessa glanced at him. If this goes bad, she said, Northstar will claim you're a vigilante. I'm not here to play hero, Caleb replied. I'm here to stop them from burying her. They reached Ruth's old street, and the house came into view. Cedar siding dulled by winter, porch steps dusted with snow, curtains hanging wrong like someone had left in a hurry. Evan's key turned in the back lock with a soft click that felt too loud in an empty home. The air inside was cold and stale, carrying the faint sweetness of old wood. Ruth's life was still everywhere. One chair pulled back, a blanket folded over the armrest, a sewing kit on the table like she'd meant to return in an hour. Tessa's eyes flicked across family photos, and she went still for a moment, as if the story had suddenly become a person instead of a headline. Evan cleared his throat. Basement, he said, voice clipped. That's where they hide things when they don't want daylight. They moved carefully, boots quiet, breath fogging. At the top of the basement stairs, Caleb's stomach tightened. Not fear, instinct. The smell down there wasn't just cold. It had a sharp chemical edge that didn't belong in someone's home. They descended. The basement was dim, bare bulb dead from the earlier power cut, flashlight beams slicing the dark. And then it happened. A faint scuff above them. A footstep on the floorboards. Too measured to be a settling house. Evan froze. Caleb's hand lifted slightly, a silent command to pause. Tessa swallowed hard, but she didn't speak. Another step. Then a voice from upstairs, smooth and familiar. Deputy Cross, Silas Cade called like he was greeting a friend at church. Didn't expect to see you working off hours. Evan's face drained. How? Caleb didn't waste the question. Rourke wasn't here to warn them. They had to become their own warning. Caleb motioned toward the far wall where new boards didn't match the older planks. Wood too fresh, nails too clean. Evan saw it too and moved with him, jaw clenched. They pried the boards loose just enough to expose a cramped cavity stacked with boxes and folders. Tessa's flashlight caught stamped contracts, duplicate forms, neat piles of corrections. Evan flipped open a ledger and went rigid. These approvals, Evan whispered. These initials, I've seen them on permits. Town office, planning committee. The corruption landed like a weight in the room. This wasn't one company exploiting loopholes. This was a pipeline, paper moving through hands that were supposed to protect people like Ruth. Upstairs, Silas's footsteps drifted closer. "I'd hate for there to be misunderstandings," he said, voice warm, "especially when the weather's so dangerous." Caleb grabbed what mattered: the ledger, a stack of originals with Ruth's name, and one folder thick with stamped dates. Tessa shoved pages into her bag, hands shaking but fast. Evan's phone came out. Quick photos, quick proof. A door slammed upstairs. The sound cracked through Caleb like a rifle shot in memory. His breath caught, his shoulders tightened. Then the faint clink of dog tags in his mind pulled him back to the present. Ruth by the stove, Rourke guarding the door, a life depending on him staying steady. "Now," Caleb said. They moved. Evan led them to the basement bulkhead, pushing it open into a blast of snow and wind. They spilled into the backyard and ran, boots sliding on hidden ice. Behind them, the back door banged open and voices poured out. Shouts, not loud with rage, but loud with control. Tessa slipped hard, hitting the ground with a gasp. Her bag skidded, spilling a few pages into the snow like white flags. Caleb turned without thinking. He hauled her up, arm locked around her shoulders, dragging her back into motion. Evan raised his pistol and fired one warning shot into the air, not at anyone, just enough to freeze the moment and remind them there were consequences to chasing a deputy through a neighborhood. Silas's men slowed, not because they were afraid of a gun, because witnesses could ruin business. They didn't stop running until the trees in a side street swallowed them. When they finally ducked behind a parked truck, breath tearing, Tessa opened her bag with shaking hands. "Not enough," she whispered. "We got pieces, proof of the pattern, but not the full chain." Evan's jaw worked like he was chewing on rage he couldn't afford. "It's enough for a public meeting," he said, "enough to make them squirm." Caleb stared back toward Ruth's street where the house sat quiet again, pretending innocence. His phone vibrated once. No new message, just the ghost of threat pressing against his skin. He had a moral choice now, clear as winter light: trade the evidence back and buy Ruth temporary peace, or put the truth on a table where it couldn't be quietly buried. Caleb's voice stayed low. "Town hall is tomorrow night," he said. "We do this in the open." And somewhere above the town, the mountain kept its silence, waiting to see what kind of man Caleb would be when the storm stopped being weather and started being people. They didn't have the full file, but they had enough to make Northstar nervous. Fear sat in the edges of every conversation like static. Caleb drove back up the mountain with the documents tucked under his coat and a decision locked behind his ribs. Ruth was worse when he returned. Fever high, cough deep, skin too hot beneath the blanket. Caleb's hands moved without hesitation. Medicine, water, another log on the fire, a cool cloth on her forehead. Rourke watched every motion, eyes alert but calmer now that Caleb was home, as if the dog recognized a teammate returning to post. "We'll go tomorrow," Ruth rasped when she caught her breath. "I can sit. I can listen." Caleb shook his head. "You're sick," he said. "You're not their symbol. You're a person. You stay warm." Ruth tried to argue. Caleb didn't raise his voice. He simply sat beside her chair until she understood the refusal was protection, not control. Then he stood, walked to the mantel, and touched the dog tag chain once. Metal, cool against his fingers, like a private oath he didn't need to speak. In town, the next evening, the community hall glowed against the snow like a lantern meant for storms. Cars lined the street. People stamped their boots at the door, shaking off cold and curiosity. Caleb arrived early with Tessa and Evan. He kept himself near the back where he could see exits. Evan wore his uniform crisp, jaw tight like he was bracing for impact. Tessa carried her notes and copies, every page labeled, time-stamped, and backed up, because truth without structure was just a story. Northstar's people showed up too. 2 men in tailored coats and a third with silver at his temples and a smile that belonged on a billboard. His name, according to Evan, was Gage Holloway, local advisor, generous donor, the kind of man who shook hands like he was blessing you. Rourke lay at Caleb's feet, steady as stone. He looked out of place in a hall full of folding chairs and murmuring neighbors, but no one complained. Most people avoided his eyes the way people avoid anything that might reveal their own choices. Tessa took the stage first. She didn't rant. She didn't beg. She spoke like someone who had been collecting dots for too long and finally drew the line. She laid out the pattern. Loans sold as rescue. Rates shifted without explanation. Documents corrected after signatures. Foreclosures accelerated with strange speed. Names, dates, neighborhoods. The room shifted as people recognized streets, friends, family. Then Evan stepped up. His voice was controlled but real. He confirmed what he could as law enforcement, the complaints, the timelines, the unusual approvals, the sabotage devices found on a private mountain property. When he said devices, the murmurs sharpened into something closer to anger. Finally, Caleb walked forward with a thin stack of originals. Ruth's name visible, ink unaltered, paper heavy in a way copies never were. He placed them on the table and didn't add a speech. He didn't need one. The room leaned toward the evidence like heat. Gage Holloway rose with practiced calm. "Let's not get emotional," he said, smiling as if he were soothing children. "These are complex agreements. People misunderstand terms all the time. Northstar has helped many residents here." Rourke stood, no bark, no snarl, just a sudden, unmistakable intensity. His nose lifted once, then his gaze snapped to Gage's sleeve. The dog's body angled as if he'd caught a scent that didn't belong in a room full of winter coats and coffee breath. Caleb felt the hairs on his arms rise. Not because of the dog, because he trusted the dog. Rourke made a low sound that vibrated once in his chest. A warning bell struck softly. Caleb leaned down, hand hovering near Rourke's shoulder. "What is it?" he murmured. Rourke's nostrils flared. His eyes flicked to the door, then, strangely, to a wall map near the exit where old service roads were pinned in faded ink. Then back to Caleb, urgent in a way that didn't need words. Gasoline. Caleb's stomach dropped into cold clarity. The clean power cut. The wired unit behind his cabin. The pattern of intimidation. This wasn't just about contracts. It was about erasing what couldn't be argued away. He straightened. "Evan," he said, voice low. Evan saw it immediately. Something in Caleb's face, something in Rourke's posture. Evan moved toward the door, hand near his radio. Tessa froze, then grabbed her bag like she understood. A story can be killed before it's ever aired. Gage kept talking, smile still fixed. "If we can all remain rational." Caleb didn't give him the stage. He stepped toward Evan. "Old warehouse," he said. "Now." The room erupted into confusion. Chairs scraping, people talking over each other, someone demanding answers. Evan pushed through with authority that finally had a direction, barking quick instructions to two officers near the door. Tessa followed, breath sharp with adrenaline. Caleb stayed close behind, Rourke moving at his heel with controlled urgency. Outside, the cold slapped them hard. The town's lights blurred through falling snow as they ran to Evan's vehicle. Sirens didn't scream at first. Evan kept it quiet because loud arrivals gave guilty people time. The old warehouse sat at the edge of town near a service road half buried in drifts. As they turned onto the approach, Rourke's body went rigid again, nose pressed to the crack of a window as if the air itself carried confession. A faint orange flicker danced against a loading bay. "Go," Caleb said. They moved fast. Evan called it in. Caleb grabbed an extinguisher mounted near a utility pole, small town safety that finally mattered. Two figures in dark coats scrambled near stacked pallets, one holding a can, the other crouched low like he'd already lit the match. Evan's voice cracked across the lot. "Hands where I can see them." One man bolted. The other froze, then raised his hands too slowly, still pretending he didn't understand. Caleb didn't chase blindly. He read angles, cut off the escape line, and forced the runner toward Evan's officers as they arrived. No punches, no spectacle, just containment, because the fire was the real threat. The small flame on the pallet licked upward, hungry. Caleb emptied the extinguisher in a white blast. Foam swallowed the orange. The flicker died with a hiss that sounded almost disappointed. When the smoke cleared, Gage Holloway's rational composure was gone. He stood at the far end of the lot, having arrived in a separate car, face pale beneath the warehouse lights. The scent of gasoline clung to him like truth. Evan stepped toward him, cuffs ready. "Gage Holloway," he said, voice flat. "You're under arrest." Gage tried to speak. Money, influence, denial, but words didn't matter with fuel on the ground and witnesses in the snow. Tessa filmed from a safe distance, hands shaking, eyes bright with grim relief. Caleb looked down at Rourke, who stood steady, chest heaving, not proud, just sure. Back at the hall, the crowd heard the sirens at last. This time, the sound didn't feel like danger. It felt like consequence. Later that night, Caleb drove up the mountain with the heater blasting and the documents sealed tight. The storm eased into lighter flakes, like winter had spent its fury and only had silence left. He carried the dog tags in his pocket now, the metal clinking softly with every turn of the wheel, an anchor that kept him here. Ruth was awake when he returned, eyes glassy with fever but focused. She searched his face. "It's stopped," Caleb said gently. "The fire. The threat." Ruth's breath shuddered. "And my home?" Caleb's throat tightened. He could promise warmth. He could promise effort. But he couldn't promise the court would move faster than greed. "Not tonight," he admitted, "but tomorrow. We make it impossible for them to pretend." Rourke settled beside Ruth's chair, head resting near her foot like a vow made without language. Caleb fed the stove, watched the flames rise, and understood something he hadn't wanted to. He hadn't opened his door just once. He'd opened it into a life that would demand he stay, until the truth held. By morning, the town felt different. Not warmer, not safer, just awake. Word moved faster than snowplows. The warehouse attempt couldn't be shrugged off as a misunderstanding, not with officers on scene and Tessa's footage already duplicated in 3 places. Federal agents arrived before noon, dark coats and calm faces, the kind of presence that made local power suddenly look small. Northstar's office downtown was sealed with tape, the door handles tagged like evidence. Phones rang into silence. People who'd smiled through every foreclosure notice started refusing eye contact. Evan Cross didn't get congratulated. He got a meeting. He called Caleb from the parking lot behind the station, voice low, anger held in a tight fist. "They're putting me on administrative suspension," Evan said. "Pending review." Caleb leaned against his truck, the mountain wind pushing cold against his jaw. "For what?" he asked, though he already knew. "Procedure," Evan replied, spitting the word like it tasted rotten. "For stepping onto that property. For presenting things I should have run up the chain." He paused. "For embarrassing people who don't like daylight." Caleb didn't try to sugarcoat it. "You did the right thing," he said. Evan exhaled hard. "Right doesn't pay a mortgage." Caleb looked up at the town below, roofs white, streets bright under winter sun. "It will," he said quietly. Not with gratitude, with proof. At the clinic, Ruth's fever finally began to break. The doctor adjusted her medication again and looked at Caleb like she was weighing him for sincerity. "She needs stability," she repeated. "Stress will slow recovery." Caleb nodded. "I'll handle the stress," he said, and realized he meant it. Ruth blinked at him from the bed, skin pale against the sheet. "You don't have to be my shield," she whispered. Caleb didn't answer with a speech. He reached into his pocket and set the dog tag chain on the bedside table, metal glinting under fluorescent light. "I know," he said. "I'm choosing it." The legal answer arrived 2 days later. Not a miracle, not a full reversal, but a door cracked open. A temporary stay, emergency housing authorization, and a court date moved up because credible risk had been documented. Northstar's attorneys protested on paper, but paper didn't carry the same weight when it came with sabotage devices and attempted arson. Tessa met Caleb outside the courthouse steps, cheeks pink from cold, eyes sharp with exhaustion. "They'll try to paint Ruth as reckless," she warned. "They'll say she signed. They'll say she abandoned the property. They'll say anything that makes their pattern look like personal responsibility." Caleb's mouth tightened. "Then we keep showing the pattern," he replied, "until it's louder than their story." In the days that followed, the cabin began to change in small, almost embarrassing ways. A neighbor, an older man Caleb had nodded at once a year and never spoken to, left a casserole on the porch and disappeared before anyone could thank him. Another day, someone dropped off firewood stacked neatly, like an apology made of labor. A woman from town brought a knitted hat for Ruth and pretended it was extra. Caleb didn't chase them down. He didn't demand explanations. He just brought the food inside, added another chair near the stove, and let the mountain witness something he'd stopped believing in. Community returning. Slow and awkward, but real. Ruth sat by the hearth again, wrapped in a scarf that smelled faintly of lavender from someone else's home. Her hands shook less now. When she laughed, it came out thin but true. Rourke lay at her feet, eyes half closed, still listening, but no longer braced for attack every second. One night, wind slammed a tree branch against the cabin wall with a hard crack. Caleb's shoulders jumped, his breath snagging like a hook in his chest. For a moment, he wasn't in a cabin. He was somewhere older, somewhere louder. Then Rourke stood, walked to him, and pressed his head into Caleb's thigh with steady weight. Caleb put his palm on the dog's neck and breathed through the surge, counting the stove's pops, naming objects in the room, table, mug, blanket, forcing his pulse to slow. Ruth watched without pity, only understanding. "You don't need to save me," she said softly, eyes on the fire. "You just need to stay." Caleb stared at the flames until they stopped looking like danger. Staying had always felt harder than leaving. Leaving was clean. Staying meant being seen, needed, vulnerable. Outside, snow fell quietly, covering old tracks and fresh ones alike. Inside, the cabin held a different kind of silence now, one with people in it, one that didn't ask Caleb to disappear. And in that quiet, he realized the storm had changed him in the simplest way. It had made him choose a door that stayed open. The worst of winter loosened its grip a few weeks later. The mountain still wore snow, but it stopped feeling like a threat and started feeling like a season. Cold, honest, passable. The road up to Caleb's cabin was plowed more often now, not because the town suddenly cared about him, but because someone had started caring about Ruth. She moved slower than she used to, still healing, but her eyes carried more light. Every morning she sat by the stove with yarn in her lap, fingers remembering a rhythm that steadied her breath. She knit without rushing, as if patience itself was a form of faith. Rourke stayed close, always close, but the tight, sleepless vigilance softened. He still rose when vehicles came up the road, still watched strangers with measured caution, but he also slept deeper, head on his paws, chest rising slow, like he finally believed the room would remain warm. One afternoon, Caleb found himself building something he hadn't planned. A simple ramp over the cabin's front step, sanded, smooth, sturdy enough for Ruth's careful feet and kind to Rourke's bad leg. He didn't announce it. He just built it, then stepped back like the work had always belonged there. Ruth stood at the doorway and stared for a long moment. "You think of everything," she said softly. Caleb shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "I think of what fails," he replied. Ruth smiled, sad, kind. "And you still choose to mend it," she said. The court decision didn't come like fireworks. It came like paperwork finally doing what it should have done in the first place. The stay became stronger. Northstar's local network began unraveling under subpoenas and testimonies. Ruth's house wasn't handed back overnight, but the path stopped being a dead end. It became a road again, slow, legal, real. On a Sunday evening, as pale light fell across the trees, a knock came at the cabin door. Caleb froze for half a heartbeat, old reflex, then he heard laughter outside. Not fear, not wind, voices, neighbors. He opened the door and found 3 people standing there with awkward smiles. The man who'd left the casserole, a woman holding a pie wrapped in foil, and a teenager clutching a bundle of mail like it was important. The man started, clearing his throat. "We heard you might need these, and we wanted to say—" His words tangled. Caleb didn't force him to finish. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said, and meant it without surprise. Ruth rose from her chair, scarf around her shoulders, eyes shining. Rourke padded forward, sniffed the visitors, then gave a slow, careful wag. Approval granted. The teenager knelt and scratched behind his ears, and Rourke leaned into it, closing his eyes like he'd earned the right to enjoy kindness. Later, when the visitors had gone and the fire burned low, Caleb stood at the mantel. He picked up the photograph he'd kept half hidden for years and set it where the light could reach it. Then he laid the dog tags beside it, chain catching the glow. Ruth watched from her chair. "She'd be proud," she said. Caleb didn't answer quickly. He swallowed once, throat tight, and nodded. Outside, snow fell in soft flakes, gentle for once, tapping the window like a quiet reminder. The miracle hadn't been the storm ending. The miracle was simpler. A door opened, and after everything it stayed that way. Tonight's miracle wasn't lightning in the sky. It was warmth showing up when it mattered most. And sometimes, that's exactly how God works. Through kindness, through courage, through one door that finally opens. In the comments, tell me what city you're listening from, and what small moment has helped you keep going lately. If you enjoy stories like this, please like, share, and subscribe so we can meet again. May God bless you, protect your home, and wrap your heart in peace through every storm you face.